So I think I get the notification before you do. So we're live. We're live now on Facebook.
We are live. We are live. So let's give it a moment. Just make sure we're streaming. It's good. We're on Facebook.
Another Saturday.
Another Saturday. They're
Another
coming thick and fast. It's so good.
I know. I just it was only 2 weeks, literally. Well, because we do it obviously 2 weeks every 2 weeks, and it was only 2 weeks ago since we've spoken, and it seems like it's just come up already and again, in a good way. I think in a good way. And then for those who are, I guess, interested in what we're talking about in terms of this morning session on Mindful Men's Club, it was a topic of celibacy, and it was suggested by one of the men in our group. And I think it's safe to say that the topic stretched everyone, and it took certainly us out of our comfort zone. And certainly what we're doing now is definitely out of our comfort zone, talking about celibacy live on Facebook. But we had a fantastic conversation, and we had a lot of references from what it meant from a sporting context, what it meant from a spiritual context, what it meant from a religious context, and what it meant from a mental health context, and the pros and cons of it, because there are pros and cons and everything. I mean, and I think what was great, Viraj, is that there wasn't one school of thought on the topic of celibacy. I think it's a topic that men definitely, I think if you were to pick a topic that they least talk about, this would probably rank in the top three. I don't know what the other two are, but I know this would definitely rank in the top three. And it was great that the men that we had, that we have every other week, that are so open. And I think one of the comments that one of the men made was that it's nice to see that there's threads of commonality amongst different parts of different people's lives that they've experienced themselves about celibacy, whether that's growing up and being celibate pretty much half your life or a quarter of your life for whatever reason, and there's nothing bad or good about it. It's just a personal choice, and what that means in terms of conversation when you're talking to other females or other males, and why is it such a taboo subject. And we were even talking about celibacy amongst women, right? Because it's an equal topic, and we've got a lot of women on our Facebook group. So I'm not sure how many comments or suggestions we'll get, but let's go with the flow. So I guess this is open to any men and women who want to post any questions about celibacy, but we're going to sort of just take you through some of the extracts of conversation that actually did happen. We're not going to go into too much detail and mention any names, obviously, because that's personal to the men who actually attended, and we don't record the sessions on purpose for those rare reasons, to hold that integrity. But yeah, is there any way you want to start this off?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about this subject, and again, just acknowledging the openness that everyone brought, and actually the level of maturity and inquisitiveness, because this was something that was suggested by a member that they wanted to talk about and get a consensus on how it means. And I think this is actually a very, very important conversation to have, because if you think about it this way, it's almost a taboo subject. Like, I suppose sexuality in general isn't something that people talk about. And what was quite refreshing in this conversation was just the different perspectives people had, and the benefits of what celibacy could mean in terms of advancing a spiritual practice or in a performance context when we talk about sport. And I think the key thing that we came to in terms of a conclusion was it's about the awareness of why is someone choosing to be celibate or abstain, or what is their why, importantly, and actually having a healthy understanding of it, because we shared how as teenagers, when men and women are growing up and they're talking about what's happening to their bodies, rather than it being suppressed as something that you kind of don't talk about or hidden, or people then end up going to pornography or whatever they do to kind of understand what their bodies are telling them. It's actually being able to have that healthy conversation as to what is going on and what is going to work from them, which can then manifest into more healthy relationships where there's better communication of needs, understanding, boundaries. Or if someone is more spiritually inclined, they're actually forwarding their spiritual practice rather than being potentially tempted by what's happening in the material, physical world, by the senses and sensuality, and having that temperance and peace of mind to go about whatever purpose or journey that they have without necessarily being too caught up. So I think awareness is really the key point here. And then
Yeah.
a healthy understanding of why, if someone is choosing to be celibate, what is the advantage for them? So the example that two examples that were quite vivid was the scene in Rocky 1 where Mickey's telling Rocky that having sex will make him weak in the legs. So the idea is that the boxer will refrain from sex because he gets the energy to kind of go out there and fight.
Mhm.
Whereas on the spiritual side of things, the idea of illicit sex takes you away from the spiritual journey because you're more attached to the material world and matter rather than advancing your spiritual practice. But either way, the intention of celibacy is there's like in order to further something along or to attain some kind of result, and then the context will then vary based on where that person is and what they're choosing to do.
Yeah, definitely, and I think some great examples and depths in conversation there. So I think from a sports perspective, you mentioned the famous scene in Rocky 1. I'll probably have to watch it again because it's one of my favorite movies. And then we were talking earlier before the actual live started, right, on the Mindful Men's Club about Premiership footballers, and they abstain from sex before a Premiership match because it gives them a heightened sense of energy from a physical perspective. And I think awareness is the actual word that was probably the most synergistic amongst everyone who was in the conversation, because there's no clearly, from our conversation anyway, we're happy to have a conversation with anyone on here live. There's clearly no one size fits all. For example, there's no good or bad. For example, if you're doing it from a spiritual perspective and you're doing it to, I guess, detach from the material realm, if you like, then that's why they do it, right? And it's obviously practiced quite highly in monks, whether you're a Buddhist monk in a monastery or whether you're a monk from any other ashram, right? It doesn't really make a difference. I think that's what they all have
And
in
even
common.
in the Abrahamic faiths as well, there's in the church certain people will also abstain as well, and
Yeah,
you just
some of the stuff that we talked about was questions like, how would you respond if a guy said to you that I'm celibate, or I've been celibate, right? Would you laugh? Would you jest? Would you do the macho thing, or would you think, so what, right? Like literally, like it's an interesting conversation, isn't it? But that's defined by your crowd, that's defined by your tribe, right? Because you touched on the word maturity, right? I mean, yeah, it was a very mature conversation, but we did obviously have a few jest moments, but that's natural, right? It's just us being authentic in our own sort of vibe. But it was a really mature conversation, and I think saying to somebody that you're celibate, what's wrong with it? Like seriously, like is it that taboo that you're going to get a negative reaction? But equally, there were different schools of thoughts, and there were some men saying that saying to someone that you're celibate might be a justification, or that you need something from that peer group or assurance. So I think you've got to really take it from a personal situation, and who is the person? Why are they sharing that with you? Are they trying to reach out to you?
Yeah.
Because celibacy can actually, being celibate for a lot of your life can play havoc in your mental life, right? And we played quite a few scenarios out in real scenarios where people have suffered from their mental health because of being celibate.
I think it's the distinction between celibacy as a form of expression or suppression. And I think that was something that came up before in terms of like people not necessarily going out of their way, but feeling like they need to refrain from certain people in society because of the reactions and what it may or may not trigger. And what's interesting about that is that really healthy? And is that something that's being prescribed or something that you've chosen to do? Because if you're told to do something and physiologically something else is happening, there is that sort of mental battle going on of it almost becomes a right or wrong thing. Whereas if we just take away everything, it's like, well, there is a physiology to us. We have senses. We go through phases in our life where hormones will increase and decrease accordingly. So it keeps kind of coming back to that kind of self-awareness of what is the reason for you doing it, and is that coming from you, or is that something you've been told to do?
Yeah, and I think
it's celibacy a form of your expression because you're advancing a certain area of your life, and your way to advance that is to refrain from sexual activity.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting point. And one of the other conversations that came out was, from one of the guys, is that social conditioning, right? So pretty much most of his life, he's been told to be celibate because you will perform better in a sporting context, etc. And then be celibate because that's the clean way, that's the right way, that's the right way of doing it, and that's the right way of having a relationship with a female, etc. And for whatever you want to call it, saving yourself or having that pure relationship, whatever pure means to you. So it's down to the individual, isn't it, really? And it's down to the choice and the awareness of what does it mean to you. And in the spiritual context, there's certainly in the scriptures, it mentions that actually you lose intelligence, you actually lose your actual brain cells, and you actually lose intelligence. So there's so many different schools of thoughts on it in terms of why people practice celibacy. And I think there was a hashtag which I never knew anything about. Clearly I'm not socially savvy, I thought I was, but on IG that's trending, right?
No fap.
Hashtag, what is it?
No fap.
Yeah, hashtag no fap, which refers to no masturbation, basically, right, for X amount of days, etc. And the idea is that it's I don't know too much about it, but the idea is it's like a cleansiness, right? It's like cleaning you and in some way. And I think you can approach it from a physical standpoint, a physical meaning it's to your human, I guess it's your innate nature, right, to procreate, right, as humans, right, as they do. And that's why you go through puberty, and that's why you go through certain stages of evolution of your life, right? But then you've got the spiritual aspect of it, and then you've got the, I guess, personal stance of it, and what sits right for you. And what sits right for you might mean it's governed by an environment that you're brought up in. And another guy on our group mentioned the fact that the environment plays a big part in who you do. So for example, if you're hanging around with a group of guys, and nothing wrong with it, by the way, and let's say if you're in a pub and it's got that macho vibe and conversation, you're going to feel, for whatever reason, peer pressure to elevate towards that level of conversation, right? Whereas you might actually have something serious to say, but you know that may not be the context that it's to be heard in, right? Because everyone wants to have a laugh and a joke. And then you might, on the other side, let's say, might be in a spiritual sanctuary, right? In a Buddhist monastery, or whichever monastery or temple, or it doesn't really make a difference, but a place of, I guess, spiritual substance. And then you might feel that you can have that conversation without any misconception or judgment. So it really, really depends on you, like you said, the awareness. And that's the word I think is the most balanced view to have. It's the why are you celibate. It's not what you're celibate for, it's the why. Is it giving you spiritual enlightenment? Is it bringing you closer to your spirituality and your religious practice? And there was another guy who does it for religious reasons, right? And he mentioned that in his religion, everything is conceived from your eyes, meaning that there's only certain females that you should see in that religion, and that was your daughter, your wife, and your mother, right? It was those three. From that perspective. So it's really fascinating and it's interesting, isn't it, that every faith, environment, upbringing plays a footprint, if you like, on your definition of celibacy. So it's really interesting. It's really interesting.
And even to flip that as well, and this was one thing that I wanted to point out, is that we're talking about this from the male perspective as well. There's a whole other world where, if you look at, say, the nature of what we've grown up as society has us believe that sex is a one-sided thing, the man has more needs than the woman, and there is this sort of unhealthy and almost untrue construct that males are the dominant partners and females don't think or have the same feelings and needs as well. And pornography doesn't necessarily help that narrative, but it's almost like the male's needs come first before the female's needs. And the idea of is it more sexual, or is it more about the relationship and having that connection in the relationship where two partners are there to help each other with whatever their physical needs are, rather than it just being a one-sided thing as well. So whilst there's a conversation about, we initially started talking about males refraining and being celibate, females also do the same thing as well. But then also females have very similar needs. Like we talk about 50% of the world here, that their needs aren't even necessarily spoken about openly. Potentially, it's not like the pub talk that we normally see with the lads and then a few pints, but there's that healthy conversation about what people need, and having that discourse, let's say between a couple, whether they're male, female, male, male, female, female, of how the relationship works, and where that sort of sexual side comes into, as well as the connection, the intimacy, as well as all of that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, especially within South Asian culture, it's a bit of a taboo thing. And the crazy thing is that even within the South Asian culture, within the relationship, actually, people find it uncomfortable to talk about. And that's because it's a social conditioning and upbringing, right? But if you can't talk openly in your own relationship about that, then that means there's a reason why this topic needs to be talked about, and create an awareness. And it's not to, by the way, judge people about it, whoever they are, because there's reasons why, right? It's not an easy thing to talk about. Whereas you might be able to talk about the subject with a friend or somebody who's not that close to you, and completely be open, right? And it's because the people closest to you don't think, for whatever reason, that might be a normal subject to talk about. And
It's interesting when you think about the timeline. Let's use South Asian culture as an example. When you're going through, you're growing up, and when you start puberty, your body changes, your mind changes, these thoughts, feelings are there, but there's no outlet to talk about. Teenagers will then maybe go to pornography or their peer group to kind of get an understanding of what their feelings are, which could in some ways create unhealthy habits or a lack of understanding about what is going on, because that conversation doesn't really start. When they then enter relationships and enter marriage, there's all these different notions, and actually there's no clarity, there's no awareness of actually what's going on in the relationship and what works for both people. And then it could become one-sided. And then one of the other guys shared in the chat that, and kind of to this point as well, that they just didn't have time for their partner, and the relationship ended because they were just too busy. And one of the things that they distinguished was actually they didn't make time for intimacy with their partner, and their marriage ended. So it's looking at this conversation in a holistic perspective of, it's fascinating how people will go to one extreme for another. You go from, let's say, a porn or a sex addiction to no vaping, but there's no middle ground. Some people choose to abstain for spiritual practice. Some people choose to abstain for sport and performance benefits. But yet, it almost occurs like there's a need to withhold, rather than actually choosing powerfully that, okay, here's what I am going to do, and here's what I'm not going to do, and here's why, rather than almost kind of suppressing the very nature and reason why you want to do something or not do something.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm just, I guess, nicely playing onto that point is, like anything, right? If you suppress something, and that school of thought, and if you're celibate and you're a male growing up in an environment, whichever environment you're growing up in, that's a lot of pressure, right? And then one of the guys talked about the mental health adverse effects of then when he did go into an actual relationship with a female, and it was, a normal relationship, define normal these days, but a normal relationship, and he was having sex, and he felt really, really bad about it. But that's because he's been conditioned all his life to say that actually it's wrong. I'm not like, so that's the adverse effects of suppressing it. And then you've got obviously monks who practice celibacy in the monastery, and let's just put this to bed, guys, because they're human, right? They're not superhuman. They're human. I've got a lot of good friends who are monks, and it's not that they don't think about sex. They do, but they're just basically really, really well trained by reading, practicing scriptures, the Vedic scriptures, practicing that philosophy, and to abstain from actually not thinking about it, because that's impossible, right?
Yep.
That's impossible in this day and age, but not thinking about it to actually consume their thoughts to then manifest into whatever lingering thoughts and images. So because they're disciplined, right? And they live a monolithic life. And if you're in an ashram, your environment has a big part in who you are and the energy that's transferred. And therefore it's gonna be less conducive to think about it in a negative connotation. You're going to think about it in a positive connotation, where actually the more I think about it, it's attachment, and the whole essence of let's say for something like in Krishna consciousness, I'm just going to pick one for example, is detachment, and therefore detachment, and in this case detachment of not wanting to have sex or being in a marital state for whatever reason, because they want to live a monolistic life, and that's their choice, and there's nothing wrong with it. But most people don't live in an ashram, do they? Me and you, I mean, everyday sights and sounds, and whether you talked about sense gratification, right, Viraj? So whether you're hearing things, whether you're seeing things, and humans,
smelling, like,
smelling. We talked about perfume. Why do women put perfume on, right? Because it's a scent. It gives a pheromone. It makes them feel good, and it attracts other males, right? And that's a fact of life. And why do men wear aftershave? It's exactly the same thing. And why do animals secrete, their fluids? Because they're giving off pheromones. I mean, it's just a fact of life, right?
Yeah.
No one questions it, saying, why do I put this? I don't know.
Africa.
I'm thinking, because I've got EC Miyake in my cupboard, so or Lynx Africa, as it was mentioned. But yeah, whatever it is, but you just get conditioned, don't you? You grow up, you thinking you have a shave, you put aftershave on, it's normal, right?
Yeah.
But it was such a deep subject. It was a fascinating subject. We had no idea it was going to open up the way it opened up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great comment here actually, and on the theme of balance and self-awareness as well, and the idea of abstaining healthily seems to be a key in many areas of life. For example, intermittent fasting to improve your digestion, celibacy for non-sex for maybe your energy or your focus, or not necessarily being too attached to attachment again, like to a person or to a specific feeling. Recovery when you're doing exercise is not that you exercise 24/7, but you allow time to recover for restorative functions to go along as well. So it's again looking at the conversation in terms of the value that it adds and holistic benefits that it has based on what is it that you're up to in life. And it's almost taking the morality out of it. And I feel that, to the earlier point you mentioned, people feel it's right or wrong to abstain, or they're missing out on something. But again, the context is key. If you're choosing to be celibate, you're choosing it over something else.
It's a personal choice.
Should anyone externally say anything any different to you that you're somehow missing out on something? And I feel that's where people, I suppose, if we look at the two extremes, we talk about those that are more involved in religious or spiritual practices versus peak performing athletes was the example that we used. Yes, they're refraining from something, but it's to further something else. And when they're told otherwise, or they're exposed to too much on the other extreme, the fact that they're choosing to stay away from that is a conscious choice that they're making, rather than them missing out on something. Everyone has them believe that they're missing out on something.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, one of the guys on our group also shared the fact that it was that he felt that it was missing out. But is it missing out? Is it the people around you that are telling you that is it that, I think we're going to probably touch on that conscious and subconscious bias topic, but it's, what do you consciously believe to be right for you, and what's right for you may not be right for someone else, and there's nothing wrong with that. You do you, and let someone else do them. Does that make sense? Like, it's your personal choice. Like being celibate, I was celibate for 26 years. No one believed me. I was just seriously interested in making money, right? Entrepreneurship at age 11. I had lots of female friends around me, but that was my personal choice, right? It wasn't, I didn't do it for monkhood or some spiritual reason or for a religious reason. It was just my personal choice. I didn't believe in having a girlfriend for the sake of having a girlfriend. And a lot of the friends who are close friends with me now, who went to the same school that I went to, know that to be true. But they all had that. So you could argue that pressure was around me to say, I need to have a girlfriend. I need to have a girlfriend, because everywhere, look, everyone's got a girlfriend. But it's a personal choice, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
It's really a personal choice.
I think the key takeaway from this call was, I think for anyone listening right now, ultimately it is personal choice, and it's understanding the reasons why you're choosing to do it and doing what works for you. And too often we're told in society what people should or shouldn't be doing, or FOMO is amplified, and people end up going from one extreme to another. They go from, as you spoke about in the call, from having a porn or sex addiction to going to know faith. Whereas finding that middle ground for you, I think is really, really key in terms of that self-awareness piece.
Yeah,
And there's
definitely.
no right or wrong. Ultimately, I think the one thing I'd encourage people is know your reason and know your why you're choosing to do something or not do something, and strengthen that base rather than allowing too much of an external influence or personal thing to knock you away from that. But also be you and be true to yourself.
Yeah, and sometimes, you've heard me talk about OPO, right? Other people's opinion. It really does not matter. The only time it matters is when somebody is giving you an opinion based on from their heart. It's coming from their heart, first of all, and then doing it from a place of growth for the other individual because they want to see that other individual grow. Then hang around with those kind of people, right? Because they're the kind of people who are going to actually be your sounding board and your support mechanism in life. And I think it does come, everything comes down to strength, and it's like you draw on your own strength, right? So for example, if you're going to do something that is meaningful to you in your own life, whatever that is, then go do it. Go do it, right? Don't do it for sense gratification or support system or encouragement, because you don't need that, right? You don't need that pat on the back to say go and do that. If you feel that you have an awareness and something is going to get you further in your personal journey to whatever your joy state is, whether that's personal development or whether that's having a romantic relationship or whether that's whatever it is, right? Do it. And one of the guys also mentioned that um, he's quite nervous because he's got this date and he's not been on a date for a long time, and great, and there was no, certainly from our group, because that's not how we operate, there was no like thinking you should do this, you should do that. There is no you should do. It's like these are the different scenarios that potentially could happen, and we discussed it as a group, and ultimately you do what's right for you in that moment. If you think being romantic in the moment is right, and it's a two-way thing, what's wrong with it, right? If you want to go on a date and nothing happened, but you're still connected, so what? Do- do- life is full of too much expectation, and you're on mute, sorry, Raj, but life is full of too much expectation and judgments that we just listen to too much noise, and it's about filtering that noise and doing what's right for you. You're on mute, Viraj.
That was exactly what I was going to say, is that it's being aware of what your needs are first and being able to articulate and communicate them without expectation and as best as you can detach from other people's opinions. And that way you create this healthy dialogue. And let's say if you're in a relationship, to co-create the boundaries of your relationship. If you choose not to be in a relationship, to be able to be free and function around the people that matter most to you and have them understand your needs. It's too often we try to assume too much,
Mm-hmm.
and we try to sort of, again, live up to other people's opinions. But actually, if you're just very congruent and sure in yourself, stand in what you believe in, and be free to communicate that without any expectation of how other people may or may not take it. I feel at least in that way, you're giving yourself half a chance to live your truth, however that may be.
Yeah, and truth comes from this. That's a beautiful way to kind of summarize it. And truth comes from having authenticity, and authenticity comes from sharing your story, whatever that story is. I'm not saying you have to share your story publicly to everyone, but it's just speaking out, and speaking out sometimes means speaking to yourself and listening to your own inner voice, right? And following that, wherever that is and wherever that takes you, because living in other people's expectations is a really, 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 and we've covered this at depth in one of the other talks, is a really dangerous thing, and it does not serve no one, at least does it serve you, which is the most important person. Because if you can't authentically live your life on your terms, then guess what? You're going to wear a mask. Everyone's right now is wearing masks, right? Because of COVID, but you're actually literally wearing a mask on your face because you're not being your real you. And people can see it. I can see it from a mile off, and people are not living their authentic self. There's nothing wrong with it, because sometimes you've got to withdraw. You can't just be everyone to everything to everyone, and just share everything and your story with the world. You've got to choose your moments carefully and who you open up to, etc. But I think you mentioned truth resonates so much to me, and it's like, live in your own truth and be the real you, right? Because otherwise, what's the point? What is the point going from day to day and living to a label, and whatever that label is, and that label means other people's opinion of you. There's no,
Yeah.
there's no joy in that. There's no service in that. There's only one way that will end, and that's in misery.
Yeah, I've shared a couple of comments, and that's perfect that you've set up. I've shared a couple of comments in the chat about some of the things that came up in terms of like that healthy balance. So, you know, assistance for men for mental health and sexual abuse use, and people that are actually turning to religion to help with mental health because of that sort of, you know, what happens in terms of their sexual life or sexual growth or understanding. And I think ultimately it's your body, it's your choice, and just understanding what happens to you, or maybe trying to get that to how can you have things work for you. And it's building that self-awareness piece. And as you say, Manoj, it's like, find your truth, be your truth, come from a place of empowerment. Even if you had disempowering circumstances, get clear on those. And there's plenty of resources. And, you know, if anyone wants to connect with us in the group, like, feel free to do so on our Facebook page, and we can help you towards that. But find that base, be your truth. It's your body, it's your choice. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely probably a nice. I can't see all the comments, but if there's any questions from anyone, male or female, we're happy to answer it. But I think that's probably a nice way to summarize it, because even we were a little bit uncomfortable, just to keep it real, like thinking, really, we're talking about celibacy. Okay, that's kind of easy because it's amongst men in our private Zoom session, but going on Facebook Live, what's going to happen, right? Well, what's going to happen is we're going to speak our truth, and wherever the conversation goes, the conversation's going to go. And that's what we do every 2 weeks, because life is about being authentic. Life is not about a fallacy. Life is not about living other people's opinions, etc. So I think truth is a really nice way of putting it. And I think that it's not just about celibacy. I know we're slightly maybe going off topic, but whatever that is, right? We talk about everything from masculine and female energy, money mindset. I mean, you name it. I can't even remember half the
Our
topic.
last conversation was on caste, color, privilege, and socioeconomics, and kind of social justice, and what else is going on in the world as well. So I think it's safe to say, and again, today was a very, very deep and interesting session, that nothing is off the table for the conversations that we're willing to have, because it's coming from people that want to have these conversations, and we're just here to facilitate the conversation privately and put it out there in the public domain, how we're doing now, because these are important conversations to have, and these are things that are affecting people's mindset and the quality of their lives. So we're here, we're the space for anyone that wants to bring things privately in our Zoom meetings that we have, or actually wants to join us on a Facebook live stream as well. Like, we're very open to doing what works, and you know, we see ourselves as just serving the community, you know, male and female. That's what we're here for, and that's what we have the pleasure of dedicating our time to.
That's it, and it's just about creating an awareness. And I think if you want to put the link for our next topic on the chat, that'd be great. And I think whilst you're doing that, just to remind everyone, male and female, thank you so much for showing up in whatever way you show up, whether that's behind the scenes, in the front, likes, comments, doesn't really matter. In a nice way, so long as you show up, your energy is here, your time is here, you're present in this moment. So thank you for that. If you do if you have a male in your life, and for whatever reason you think that we can help facilitate a space that might have a positive impact in their life, send them to our page, our Facebook page, which is Mindful Men's Club, also our YouTube channel, Mindful Men's Club. And yeah, I mean, we get new faces every other week, and it's nothing to religion. We get people from Malaysia, India, North, South, East, West, England, wherever, because mental health is universal and every single person is affected. And especially in the current climate that we're in, where we're so forced to go inside and locked down, and the recent news of saying, oh, you can't see this many. I mean, I lose track of how many people you can meet. I don't watch the news, but I get it through other information. But mental health is a massive thing, right? And if you don't talk about it now, when are you going to talk about it? So reach out if you think that that is something that's synergistic in terms of what we're talking about. Not just us, go to anyone you talk about, go to your friend and family, but just don't keep it inside you, because that's not healthy. And I'm talking from personal experience, and obviously so is Raj and all the men behind Mindful Men's Club. That is why we do what we do, because we don't want another man to become a statistic to suicide, and that's literally what drives us, and that's our why. And it's just about driving awareness.
We want more living legacies than painful memories.
There you go. That's a nice way. I think that's a nice way to end it. unless there's questions. I can't see. Sorry, Viraj.
No questions. But again, we'll be monitoring the chat afterwards as well for anything on the replay. I've just posted the link for some of our upcoming events as well,
Thank you.
which include bullying and suicide, me, myself, and my ego. We have a great panel conversation coming up with our sister group, Mental Wealth, and Reflections and Realizations as well. So we're open to any suggestions for any new topics. And again, if anyone wants to message our group privately, please do so as well. But I think I speak for Manoj, myself, Havan, and Saga that aren't on the call with us, is what we're committed to is more living legacies than painful memories of a life that ended too quick.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. On that note, I think have a very, very blessed weekend, everyone, and we'll see you 2 weeks' time at 11 o'clock. It's the same time. We still get questions. What time is it? It's 11 o'clock every 2 weeks, so synchronize your clocks, etc. If you're not on Facebook, all of our events are on Eventbrite, so just type Eventbrite on Google and type Mindful Men's Club in the search and you'll see all of our events. But thank you and have a really, really blessed weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
See ya.